Life in 1959, the birth of modern cool. Picture this. It's a Friday night in 1959. The smell of fresh cut grass mingles with gasoline and cherry coke. A turquoise Chevrolet Impala idles at the corner, its tail fins reaching toward the stars like a rocket ready for launch. Inside the local diner, teenagers crowd around a jukebox, pumping nickels into the glowing machine. The needle drops, and suddenly, the whole place comes alive. Welcome to 1959, the year America stopped looking back at the war and started looking forward to the future. This was the birth of modern cool, the moment when rock and roll stopped being a fad and became a revolution, when diners became temples, when cars became art, and when being young meant something brand new. This is the story of life in 1959, a year that would define American culture for generations to come. A year balanced perfectly between the innocent optimism of the post-war era and the rebellious transformation that would explode in the decade ahead. So, buckle up, adjust your rearview mirror, and let's cruise back to a time when everything felt possible and the future was as bright as the chrome on a Cadillac bumper. By 1959, America had fully shaken off the shadows of World War II. The economy was booming. Factories that once made bombers now made Buicks. Soldiers who'd returned home were now fathers with steady jobs, two-car garages, and mortgages they could actually afford. The average family income was around $5,000 a year. That doesn't sound like much now, but back then, it could buy you a 3-bedroom house, a brand new car, and still leave enough for Saturday night at the movies. The GI Bill had transformed the nation. Veterans who might never have dreamed of owning a home were suddenly moving into brand new suburban developments. These weren't just houses, they were symbols of achievement, proof that you'd made it, that you were part of the American dream. Suburbia exploded. Levittowns and planned communities spread across the landscape like a dream made of concrete and optimism. Everyone wanted the same thing: stability, comfort, and a little slice of heaven with a white picket fence. These suburbs were revolutionary in their own way. Identical homes lined identical streets. Everyone had the same sized lawn, the same model refrigerator, the same station wagon in the driveway. It was conformity, sure, but it was also security. After the chaos of war and the deprivation of the Depression, Americans craved predictability, and they had television now. Not just a luxury, but a staple. By 1959, nearly 90% of American homes had a TV set. Families gathered around the glowing screen like it was a fireplace. They watched Leave It to Beaver, The Twilight Zone, and American Bandstand. TV told them how to dress, what to buy, and what the American dream looked like. It looked like chrome. It looked like convenience. It looked like a Frigidaire refrigerator in pastel pink and a Ford Thunderbird parked in the driveway. Department stores were packed every weekend. Consumer culture was in full swing. You could buy everything on credit now: washing machines, dishwashers, the latest hi-fi stereo system to play your records. Madison Avenue advertising men had figured out how to sell not just products, but lifestyles, and Americans were buying. But beneath the surface, something else was brewing: a restlessness, especially among the young. The children born right after the war were teenagers now. They'd grown up in prosperity. They didn't remember the Depression, or the ration books, or the fear. They had allowances, free time, and for the first time in history, they had their own culture, their own music, their own fashion, their own identity. Their parents didn't quite understand it. And honestly, that was kind of the point. If you wanted to understand 1959, you had to understand the diner. These weren't just restaurants, they were community centers. Churches of chrome and linoleum where everyone from factory workers to high schoolers came to see and be seen. Walk into any diner in 1959 and you'd be hit with a wall of sensation. The smell of coffee, always fresh, always brewing. The sizzle of burgers on a flat top grill. The clink of silverware on ceramic plates, the murmur of conversation mixing with the mechanical hum of the milkshake machine. The menu was simple: burgers, fries, malts, and Coca-Cola served in those iconic green glass bottles, blue plate specials, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, apple pie with a slice of cheddar cheese melted on top. But it wasn't about the food, it was about the vibe, the neon glow, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, the laughter bouncing off tile walls. Diners were designed to feel modern, sleek, futuristic even. Stainless steel exteriors that gleamed in the sunlight, big windows so you could see and be seen, formica countertops in bright colors, red vinyl booths with chrome trim. Everything was smooth, clean, and shiny. This was the future, and it looked like a spaceship. Behind the counter, you'd find the soda jerk, usually a young guy in a white paper hat, mixing malts and flipping burgers with practiced ease. He knew everyone's name, knew how you liked your burger. Extra pickles, no onions, shake it a little longer. The waitresses were legends in their own right. Quick with a coffee pot, quick with a joke. They'd call you honey or sweetheart and somehow make it feel genuine. They worked hard, hustled for tips, and kept the whole operation running smooth. Teenagers ruled the diner after dark. This was their kingdom. The jukebox was the throne, and whoever controlled the music controlled the mood. You'd slide in a nickel, maybe a dime if you were feeling generous, and suddenly Chuck Berry, or Little Richard, or Buddy Holly would blast through the speakers. The whole place would shift. Feet would start tapping, shoulders would start swaying. The jukebox wasn't just a music player, it was a social hub. Groups of kids would crowd around it, flipping through the song selections, debating what to play next. Do we go with something upbeat? Something romantic? The choice mattered. The right song could make or break the evening. The diner was where you took your girl after the sock hop, where you made plans, where you gossiped, where you figured out who you were and who you wanted to be. It was where romances started, where friendships were forged, where dreams were shared over a split milkshake with 2 straws. And if the weather was nice, you didn't even have to go inside. Car hop service meant you could stay in your car, roll down the window, and have dinner delivered on a tray that hooked right onto your door. Picture it. You're parked under the neon lights, the radio's playing low, your girl's sitting close. A waitress on roller skates glides up with burgers and fries. Life doesn't get much better than this. The diner wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. Freedom with a side of fries. It was where you went to escape your parents, your homework, your responsibilities. For a few hours, you could just be. No pressure, no judgment. Just you and your friends and the promise of a good time. Now let's talk about the music. Because 1959 was the year rock and roll cemented itself as the voice of a generation. Sure, rock had been around since the mid-50s. Elvis had exploded onto the scene in 56. Chuck Berry had been duck walking across stages since 55. But by 59, it wasn't just a rebellious noise anymore. It wasn't a fad that parents hoped would fade away. It was mainstream. It was dangerous. It was sexy. And parents hated it, which of course made teenagers love it even more. Rock and roll was more than just a new sound. It was a cultural earthquake. It mixed black rhythm and blues with white country music. It broke down barriers. It made you want to move, to dance, to feel alive. And it drove the older generation absolutely crazy. Church groups called it sinful. Parent-teacher associations said it would corrupt the youth. Some towns tried to ban rock and roll dances altogether. Radio stations refused to play certain songs. The controversy only made it bigger. February 3rd, 1959. Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash in Iowa. It was a tragedy that shook the music world. 3 rising stars, gone in an instant. Don McLean would later call it the day the music died. Buddy Holly was only 22 years old. He'd revolutionized rock with his unique sound and his Fender Stratocaster. He wore glasses, which was almost unheard of for a rock star. He wrote his own songs. He was a pioneer. Richie Valens was just 17, a Mexican-American kid from California who'd broken through with his fusion of rock and traditional Latin sounds. He had his whole career ahead of him. The Big Bopper, the oldest at 28, was a DJ turned performer with a larger-than-life personality and a hit that had everyone dancing. The nation mourned, but the music didn't die. It evolved. By the end of '59, new sounds were rising. Doo-wop groups like the Drifters brought smooth harmonies and romantic lyrics. This was music you could slow dance to, music that made you feel something deep. Ray Charles was blending gospel and blues into something raw and soulful. He took sacred music and made it secular. He broke rules and created a sound that was entirely his own. Sam Cooke's voice could make you weep and dance at the same time. He had this incredible range, this smoothness. He could sing about love and heartbreak and make you believe every word. And the dance halls? Packed. Every weekend, teenagers poured into gymnasiums and community centers for sock hops. These were the events of the week. You'd take off your shoes to protect the gym floor and dance in your socks or your saddle shoes. The twist was coming. The hand jive was in. The stroll, the bop. If you couldn't dance, you weren't cool. And everyone wanted to be cool. Live bands would set up on makeshift stages, local groups trying to sound like their heroes, the guitar player trying to nail that Chuck Berry riff, the singer channeling his inner Elvis. It might not have been perfect, but it was real. It was live, it was electric, and when the slow songs came on, that's when things got interesting. The lights would dim, couples would pair off, and for 3 minutes, nothing else in the world mattered except the person in your arms and the music washing over you both. Rock and roll was more than music. It was identity. It was freedom. It was the sound of a generation that refused to be like their parents. A generation that wanted to make noise, to be heard, to matter. And in 1959, that sound was everywhere. It poured out of transistor radios, out of car speakers, out of bedroom windows, out of jukeboxes in every diner across America. The revolution would be televised, but first, it would be amplified. You could tell a lot about someone in 1959 just by looking at them. For teenage girls, the look was all about femininity with a playful edge. Swing skirts that twirled when you danced, full circle skirts that required layers of crinoline petticoats underneath to get that perfect bell shape, cardigans buttoned up the back, scarves tied in your hair, and those saddle shoes? Mandatory. The poodle skirt had become iconic, usually felt, often in pink or black, with an applique of a poodle or a record or a musical note. It was cute. It was fun. It was distinctly teenage. Sweater sets were huge, a short-sleeve sweater with a matching cardigan worn over top. You'd button the cardigan, maybe drape it over your shoulders. Pearl buttons were a nice touch. Makeup was bold, red lips, winged eyeliner. The goal was to look polished, put together, like you stepped out of a magazine. Girls studied movie stars and tried to copy their looks. The cat eye was in. The higher the wing on your eyeliner, the better. Hair was important too. Ponytails were everywhere, high and bouncy, often with a scarf tied around them. Some girls went for the page boy. Others tried for the sophisticated updo. Friday nights before a date meant hours in front of the mirror with pin curls and hairspray. For boys, the rebel look was king. James Dean had made it iconic a few years earlier in Rebel Without a Cause, and by '59, every guy with an attitude was copying the formula: leather jacket, white t-shirt, blue jeans rolled at the cuff, hair slicked back with pomade so thick you could see your reflection. The leather jacket was the ultimate symbol. It said you were tough, dangerous, maybe a little bit bad. It didn't matter if you actually rode a motorcycle or not. The jacket was enough. White t-shirts became a uniform, plain, simple, often with a pack of cigarettes rolled up in the sleeve. Marlon Brando had started that trend in The Wild One. Blue jeans were still relatively new to mainstream fashion. They'd been workwear for decades, but now they were a statement. Levi's, Lee, Wrangler. The brands mattered. The fit mattered. And they had to be worn just right. Cuffed at the bottom, sitting low on the hips, with a thick belt and a big buckle. Hair was a production. Boys spent almost as much time on their hair as girls did. Pomade, bridal cream, grease. You'd comb it back into a ducktail. Or maybe a pompadour, like Elvis. The quiff in front had to be perfect. You'd carry a comb in your back pocket for touch-ups throughout the day. This wasn't just fashion. It was a statement. I'm not my dad. I don't want a suit and tie. I want freedom. Meanwhile, the adults clung to their own uniform. Men wore suits to work, hats on the street. Fedoras were still standard. You didn't leave the house without a hat. Business attire was formal. White shirts, conservative ties, polished shoes. Women dressed modestly. Gloves, hats, and hemlines below the knee. Dresses for daytime. Pearls were essential. Everything was coordinated. Your shoes matched your purse. Your gloves matched your hat. The generational divide was visible. Literally. You could spot a teenager a mile away, and that was exactly the point. Walk down Main Street on a Saturday afternoon, and you'd see it clearly. The adults in their formal wear, looking refined and respectable. The teenagers in their rebellious uniforms, looking for adventure and trying to stand out. Fashion in 1959 wasn't just about looking good. It was about belonging. It was about showing which world you belonged to. The safe, predictable world of your parents? Or the exciting, uncertain world of youth culture? And for the first time, teenagers had a style all their own. They weren't just wearing smaller versions of adult clothes. They had their own designers, their own trends, their own icons. Fashion was identity. And in 1959, everyone knew exactly where you stood just by looking at you. In 1959, a car wasn't just a way to get from point A to point B. It was a statement, a work of art, a symbol of who you were and who you wanted to be. And oh, the cars of 1959 were beautiful. This was the peak of American automotive design, the year of maximum chrome, maximum fins, maximum style, tail fins that jutted into the sky like jet wings. Some of them rose nearly 3 feet high. They served no practical purpose whatsoever. They were pure style, pure excess, pure American confidence. Chrome so shiny you could comb your hair in it. Chrome bumpers, chrome trim, chrome accents on every surface. The more chrome, the better. It caught the light. It gleamed. It said, "Look at me." Bench seats wide enough for 3, no bucket seats yet. You'd slide across that bench seat to sit close to your date. The front seat of a car was where romance happened. And colors? Baby blue, coral pink, mint green, turquoise. Two-tone paint jobs were common. White roof with a turquoise body, pink with white accents. These weren't just cars. They were rolling works of art. The Cadillac Eldorado was the dream. Those massive fins. That length. That presence. If you drove an Eldorado, you'd made it. You were somebody. The Chevrolet Impala was the people's luxury car. More affordable than a Cadillac, but still stylish. Still impressive. The '59 Impala with its batwing rear end and cat-eye taillights became an instant classic. Ford had the Galaxy. Sleek and modern with a hint of space-age design. The name itself promised adventure, promised the future. Cars didn't just move, they glided. They floated down the highway on soft suspension. They had power steering, power brakes, automatic transmissions. Everything was getting easier, more comfortable, more luxurious. Owning a car meant freedom. You could take your girl to the drive-in. You could cruise Main Street on a Friday night, radio blasting, showing off your ride. You could escape the suburbs and hit the open road. Cruising was an art form. You drive slowly down Main Street, windows down, radio up, making the loop again and again, seeing who else was out, who had the coolest car, who had the prettiest girl. It was a parade, a social event on wheels, and the drive-in? That was the pinnacle of car culture. Drive-in movie theaters were everywhere. You'd park in front of a towering screen, hang a tinny speaker on your window, and settle in with popcorn and your sweetheart. The movie was almost secondary. The drive-in was about being together, about having privacy, about stealing kisses in the backseat while the movie flickered on the giant screen. Half the time, no one even watched the movie. The back rows were known as the passion pit for a reason. Even dining was done in your car. Drive-in restaurants were everywhere. You'd pull up, flash your headlights, and a waitress, sometimes on roller skates, would bring your food right to you. You never had to leave your car. You could go to the bank, the library, the pharmacy. Everything was becoming drive-through. Everything was designed around the automobile. Gas was cheap, about 30 cents a gallon. You could fill up your tank for a few dollars. No one worried about fuel efficiency. These cars got maybe 10 miles to the gallon if you were lucky. But gas was so cheap, it didn't matter. Service station attendants pumped it for you, checked your oil, and cleaned your windshield with a smile. Service was part of the experience. They'd check your tire pressure, top off your fluids, make sure everything was running smooth. The car was more than a machine. It was a dream on 4 wheels. It was freedom. It was status. It was identity. It was possibility. And in 1959, everyone wanted to drive. Getting your license at 16 was a rite of passage. The moment you became an adult. The moment the world opened up. The highway system was expanding. President Eisenhower had signed the Interstate Highway Act in 1956, and by 1959, new highways were connecting cities across America. You could drive from coast to coast, you could see the country, the open road was calling, and Americans answered. They packed up the station wagon, they loaded up the kids, and they drove. To see relatives, to take vacations, to explore this vast, beautiful country that felt full of endless possibility. So what made 1959 the birth of modern cool? It was the convergence of everything. Prosperity met rebellion. Tradition met innovation. Your parents' world met your world. And for the first time, youth culture had a voice. Cool wasn't just about looking good or sounding tough. It was about ease, confidence, knowing who you were, even if the world didn't quite understand you yet. It was a leather jacket and a smirk, a slow drag on a cigarette, a song on the jukebox that made your heart race. It was holding someone close under dim lights and pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. It was the open road and the promise that anything was possible. 1959 sat at this perfect intersection of innocence and rebellion. The war generation had built a world of comfort and security, but their children wanted something more, something real, something exciting. The teenagers of 1959 had everything their parents never did: economic security, free time, disposable income. They could afford to take risks, to try new things, to rebel in ways that were mostly harmless but felt revolutionary. They weren't fighting a war. They weren't struggling through a depression. They were free to be young, to make mistakes, to figure out who they were. And out of that freedom came culture, music, fashion, article, attitude, the idea that being young was something special, something worth celebrating. Before the 50s, teenagers didn't really exist as a concept. You were a child, and then you were an adult. But by 1959, there was this in-between stage, a time to explore, to experiment, to find yourself. Marketing executives figured this out. Record companies, clothing manufacturers, car companies. They realized teenagers had money and they were willing to spend it. So they started creating products specifically for them, and teenagers ate it up. They had their own economy now, their own culture, their own world. 1959 was the last year of the innocent 50s. The 60s were coming, and with them, a tidal wave of change. Political upheaval, social revolution, the civil rights movement would intensify. The Vietnam War would tear the nation apart. The counterculture would emerge. But in 1959, none of that had happened yet. There was optimism. There was joy. There was this sense that tomorrow would be even better than today. America was cruising, windows down, music up, future unknown but bright. The teenagers of 1959 would become the adults of the 60s and 70s. They'd carry this sense of possibility with them. This idea that you could be whoever you wanted to be, that you didn't have to conform, that cool mattered. And that's why 1959 was the birth of modern cool. Because everything we recognize today as youth culture, as teenage rebellion, as the generation gap, it all crystallized in this one perfect year. The music, the fashion, the attitude, the freedom. All of it came together in 1959 and created something new, something that would echo through every generation that followed. So the next time you see a vintage car or hear an old rock and roll song or see a photograph of teenagers in a diner, remember 1959. Remember the year when being young became something powerful, something magical, something cool. That was life in 1959. The birth of modern cool. A moment frozen in time. Chrome and vinyl. Leather and denim. Rock and roll and rebellion. Innocence and excitement. It was a time when the future felt bright. When anything seemed possible. When you could cruise down Main Street with the windows down and the radio up and feel like you owned the world. And for one brief, shining moment, maybe you did.